Dale and I we were truly frenemies. We were friends sometimes, we were enemies sometimes. And we kind of had a deal. If I can't win, you ain't going to win either.
Really?
That's kind of the way it was.
By the time Darrell Waltrip stepped away from full-time competition, he had already defined an era. 3 Winston Cup championships, 84 career victories. A driver who could dominate short tracks, survive superspeedway chaos, and outthink entire garages on strategy alone. He was never quiet, he was never unsure, and he never gave respect easily. Waltrip built his career on control of pace, control of pressure, control of his own narrative. In the late 1970s and through the 1980s, he was often the loudest voice in the room and the hardest car to pass on Sunday afternoon. That kind of presence does not leave much room for admiration. In NASCAR, respect is not about popularity. It is about composure under fire, intelligence in traffic, and consistency when the championship is on the line. He raced against men who could intimidate, men who could outlast, and men who could think 3 laps ahead. Some he battled for titles. Some he fought for inches at Bristol. Some forced him to adjust his entire approach to the sport. Those were the drivers who mattered. This was not about friendships. It was not about who shared a meal after the race. It was about who forced Darrell Waltrip to drive better than he planned to that morning. Who made him question a setup? Who made him rethink a restart? These were not friendships. These were standards. Number 5. Cale Yarborough. When Darrell Waltrip arrived at the top level full-time in the mid-1970s, Cale Yarborough was already a benchmark. 3 straight championships from 1976 through 1978. Aggressive, direct, physical on track when necessary. Waltrip was confident, outspoken, and building momentum. Yarborough was already established and did not care about personality. Their styles were different. Waltrip preferred calculated control, especially on short tracks where rhythm mattered. Yarborough brought raw pressure. At superspeedways like Daytona and Talladega, Cale understood airflow and positioning before many others fully mastered it. He could sense a draft forming and move before it became obvious. That created tension between them because Waltrip wanted to dictate races. Yarborough refused to be dictated to. There were real pressure moments. In the late 1970s, as Waltrip chased consistency and equipment strength improved around him, he found himself battling drivers who had already proven they could close championships. Yarborough's ability to peak at the right time forced Waltrip to sharpen his own focus in the closing stretch of seasons. At tracks like Charlotte and Atlanta, where long green flag runs tested patience, Cale would stay within reach and then apply pressure late. He rarely panicked. He rarely overstepped. What Waltrip respected most was toughness combined with awareness. Yarborough was not reckless. He was deliberate. When he moved you, it was because he had calculated the outcome. He did not need theatrics. He relied on timing and nerve. For a driver like Waltrip who valued control, seeing someone else control chaos without talking about it made an impression. Cale Yarborough represented a standard from the previous wave of champions. If you wanted to lead the sport, you had to prove you could outlast him over a season, not just beat him on a single Sunday. Yarborough never gave an inch easily. Number 4. Bobby Allison. By the time Darrell Waltrip began chasing championships seriously, Bobby Allison was already one of the most complete drivers in the garage. He had speed on superspeedways, patience on intermediate tracks, and a deep mechanical understanding of his car. Allison was not just a driver. He was part of a racing family that shaped the culture of the sport. Waltrip and Allison did not share similar personalities. Waltrip was vocal and strategic in how he managed media and pressure. Allison was steady, sometimes quiet, but deeply competitive. When they met on track, especially in the late 1970s and early 1980s, it was not about headlines. It was about positioning and survival over 400 or 500 miles. Superspeedways created some of the sharpest moments. Daytona and Talladega required trust in the draft and awareness of closing rates at high speed. Allison understood airflow before many drivers fully embraced the science behind it. He could build runs methodically and would not waste momentum. That forced Waltrip to adapt his own timing. On late restarts, Allison was disciplined. He did not jump the throttle early. He waited, then struck with precision. Short tracks like Bristol and Richmond created a different tension. Allison was not intimidated by traffic. He worked lapped cars into his advantage and rarely allowed frustration to dictate decisions. For Waltrip, who prided himself on short-track dominance that discipline mattered, Bobby could disrupt rhythm without making contact. That kind of pressure changes how a driver thinks about tire wear and entry points. What Waltrip respected most was Allison's consistency under championship weight. In 1983, when Bobby secured the title, it reinforced something Waltrip already understood. Speed alone is not enough. You need resilience across an entire calendar. Allison proved that intelligence could win just as often as aggression. Number 3. Dale Earnhardt. When Darrell Waltrip was at his peak in the early 1980s, Dale Earnhardt was still building momentum. But once Earnhardt found stability with Richard Childress racing, the balance of power inside the garage shifted. Waltrip had already won championships. He understood race management. Earnhardt brought something different. He brought force. Their first real friction came at short tracks and tight intermediates where positioning meant everything. Earnhardt did not hesitate to lean on a competitor if it improved his exit. Waltrip preferred precision and long-term planning. Earnhardt thrived in direct confrontation. That contrast created tension, especially in the mid-1980s when both were competing for wins and titles. Pressure moments defined their relationship. At Bristol, at Richmond, and especially on late race restarts, Earnhardt's presence changed the air around you. He was willing to test space in ways few others attempted. Waltrip understood the risk calculation behind that style. Earnhardt was not reckless. He knew exactly how much room existed and how much he could take. If you lifted, he capitalized. If you stood firm, he adjusted and tried again on the next lap. On superspeedways, Earnhardt evolved. Early in his career, he was known more for aggression than patience. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, he became one of the smartest draft racers in the field. Waltrip respected that transformation. It showed growth. It showed that Earnhardt was not relying solely on intimidation, but on race IQ and composure. What stood out most to Waltrip was Earnhardt's ability to perform under championship pressure. 7 titles across his career were not built on reputation. They were built on sustained excellence. Earnhardt forced everyone around him to raise their level, including veterans who believed they already understood how to win consistently. He changed the way you defended your position. Number 2. David Pearson. By the time Darrell Waltrip became a full-time contender, David Pearson was already a legend. He did not run every race late in his career, but when he showed up, he was a factor. That alone carried weight. Waltrip grew up watching Pearson's efficiency. There was very little wasted movement in how he raced. Their direct overlap was not as extended as with others on this list, but the standard Pearson set lingered inside the garage. Even in limited schedules during the late 1970s and early 1980s, Pearson could enter a race, qualify, well manage his equipment, and be present at the end. He did not need to dominate the early stages to control the outcome. On superspeedways, Pearson's understanding of timing in the draft was surgical. He rarely led laps unnecessarily. He waited for the closing stretch. That patience forced drivers like Waltrip to rethink how they measured control. Leading all afternoon meant little if someone like Pearson was conserving and studying lines for the final 20 laps. At intermediate tracks, such as Charlotte and Atlanta, Pearson's tire management was precise. He protected his right-side tires without sacrificing speed. Waltrip, who valued long-run rhythm, recognized that ability. Pearson did not chase the car. He let the race come to him. What Darrell Waltrip respected most was efficiency. Pearson's win percentage remains one of the highest in NASCAR history. He did not rely on volume of starts to build his legacy. He relied on execution. That type of performance forces competitors to examine their own approach. It demands discipline rather than noise. Pearson represented a quiet form of greatness that did not depend on personality or publicity. It depended on finishing the job when it mattered most. He proved that control does not require attention. Number 1. Richard Petty. When Darrell Waltrip entered the national spotlight, Richard Petty was already the standard by which the sport measured greatness. 7 championships, 200 career victories, a presence that defined NASCAR across decades. Waltrip built his career competing in Petty's shadow, then trying to move beyond it. Their relationship on track was shaped by era transition. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, Petty was still competitive, while Waltrip was rising into his prime. That overlap mattered. Waltrip did not defeat a fading legend. He raced a champion who still understood positioning, still managed races intelligently, and still commanded respect in the garage. At superspeedways, Petty's awareness in traffic was unmatched. He read the draft long before it became a technical conversation. He sensed momentum shifts and adjusted lanes early. Waltrip, who prided himself on strategy, recognized that Petty operated 2 laps ahead of most drivers mentally. That level of anticipation forces opponents to abandon short-term thinking. On intermediate tracks like Charlotte and Darlington, Petty's consistency created a different kind of pressure. He rarely beat himself. Even when he lacked raw speed, he positioned the car for top 5 finishes. Over a championship season, that discipline mattered. Waltrip learned that winning titles required durability, not just headline victories. What earned the deepest respect was Petty's influence on the sport itself. He was not only competing against Waltrip. He was shaping how sponsors, fans, and teams viewed professionalism. Competing against someone who carried that responsibility changed how Waltrip evaluated greatness. It was not only about lap times. It was about sustaining excellence year after year while carrying the weight of the sport's image. Petty set the benchmark that every champion had to confront. He defined what greatness looked like. Jeff Gordon represented something Darrell Waltrip did not see early in his career. A new generation shaped by engineering precision, corporate sponsorship growth, and a changing audience. When Gordon entered the Cup Series in the early 1990s, Waltrip was nearing the later phase of his driving career. The sport itself was evolving. Their on-track overlap was brief, but meaningful. Gordon's approach differed from the veterans who built NASCAR in the 70s and 80s. He was technically refined. He relied heavily on team communication setup adjustments and data-driven preparation. Waltrip came from an era where feel and instinct defined adjustments. Watching Gordon win championships in 1995, 1997, 1998, and 2001 made it clear that the standard had shifted. At intermediate tracks such as Charlotte and Atlanta, Gordon's smooth entry lines and exit discipline demonstrated how aerodynamics and chassis setup were becoming central to success. He did not force the car. He minimized mistakes. On restarts, he balanced aggression with patience. That combination reflected a sport moving toward precision rather than raw intimidation. Waltrip respected what Gordon symbolized. He represented NASCAR's expansion into a national spotlight. New sponsors, new television reach, younger audiences. The sport was no longer regional in perception. Competing against drivers like Gordon required adaptation, not nostalgia. The respect was not sentimental, it was structural. Gordon's success proved that NASCAR was entering a modern phase, and the drivers who survived had to evolve mentally as much as mechanically. He respected him for changing the sport. Darrell Waltrip's career was built on confidence. He believed in preparation, in strategy, and in controlling the pace of a race. But over time, even the most outspoken competitors learned that greatness is measured against others who refuse to bend. Each driver on this list forced Waltrip to adjust. Cale Yarborough tested durability. Bobby Allison demanded discipline. Dale Earnhardt changed the tone of confrontation. David Pearson showed efficiency over volume. Richard Petty defined sustained excellence. Jeff Gordon signaled evolution. None of those standards were handed down through conversation. They were earned through green flag runs, late restarts, and championship pressure. NASCAR does not reward reputation alone. It rewards composure when tires fade. It rewards awareness in a draft at 200 miles per hour. It rewards the ability to perform when the season narrows to a handful of races that decide legacy. Waltrip competed in multiple eras and watched the sport transition from regional roots to national prominence. Through that evolution, the one constant remained competition. Rivalries shaped him. They sharpened his instincts. They reinforced that respect inside the garage is not public. It is quiet. It is understood by those who have survived the same battles. In NASCAR, respect is earned one lap at a time,